Hi, everyone. Here is the next podcast in our series. The next one is going to be a two-part talking about angles and radian measure. The first half, we're going to talk about an introduction to the unit circle. And then my second half, we're going to talk more about how to change angles into radians and radians into angles. And we can also talk about coterminal angles and things like that. So this is more of an introduction to the unit circle. I do have another podcast all about the unit circle, so you can definitely take a look at that for additional information. So we can have angles that are positive or negative, and this is something that's new that we didn't have in geometry. So in geometry, we always had positive angles, but now that we're looking at it in a different lens, depending on which way we can spin either a positive direction or a negative direction. We wanted to have a different way to talk about which way are you spinning. And so that's where the positive and negative came from. So when we are going to go counterclockwise, so that means we're going this way, that's going to give us our positive numbers if we keep turning that way. And if we go the other way, so if I'm going to rotate clockwise and go the other way, then I'm going to be dealing with negative angles. So it just depends on which way we're going. We also have something called a quadrantal angle. A quadrantal angle is an angle where the terminal side lies along the axis. So that would be our 360-degree angle. Or we could be talking about 90 degrees. Or we could be looking at 270 degrees, those kind of angles. So ones where, again, one of my lines is going to be an axis. We're going to have a unit circle in just a little bit. And once we make our own unit circle, we'll kind of talk about the trend of how do you make it and things like that. But with your unit circle, once you design this, you should be able to use this, and you will be able to use this on the test. So please make sure that you're taking great notes with that and so forth. Now, we will get more in the definition of radian and so forth in just a little bit. So when we have a radian, by the way, a radian is just another way to measure an angle. We're used to doing degrees, but a radian is a measure of an angle where it's in standard position where the terminal side intercepts an arc of length 1. So it's going to be 1 unit. So our circumference of our unit circle, it's going to be, our radius is going to be 1. So therefore, our circumference would be 2 pi r, which basically would be 2 pi. So one revolution around the circle is considered 360 degrees. And most of you guys know that. You know that there's 360 degrees in a circle. So again, we'll talk more about degree measure versus radian measure as we continue along. Okay, so that's kind of what we have here. So degree measure, again, if we're looking at a full revolution, we're talking about 360 degrees. If we're talking about radians, which we eventually will get to, then that's going to lead us into what we call 2 pi. If we put it all together, this is eventually what we're going to be building together in class, which is our unit circle. And our unit circle is going to be broken into our different angles, and then we're going to also break it into what we call radians. And so we're going to spend this detailed process going through this in class. It's not something I'm going to do via podcast because it takes a long time, and I don't necessarily want to waste your time going through that. So don't necessarily right now worry about the ordered pairs. The ordered pairs are, by the way, our exact values because when we are taking a look at what these represent, when we get our ordered pairs, that first number is going to give me the cosine of the angle, and then the second number is going to give me the exact sine of that angle. And so we're going to be utilizing that at some point. But today's focus is more about turning. So again, which way am I turning? And then if I have a terminal side, where is my terminal side going to land? And that's what we're going to focus on for today. And so the first part is right here, you can see on the board. So 1 through 7. So we're going to sketch our angle, and we'll talk a little bit about how do we change this, and also how can we look at the unit circle to help guide us here on being able to do that. So for number 1, we're trying to sketch 97 degrees. So when we're going to sketch 97 degrees, we know where 90 degrees is. And again, we're turning this way because it's going to be positive. 7 degrees more is just going to be a little bit past that 90-degree line. So this is what I call about terminal ray So that ray that I just drew, that's basically where is the angle going to end. Terminal means, you know, like ending. And then we have to figure out what quadrant is that terminal ray in. And so this is in quadrant 2. And so we're going to put the Roman numeral 2 there. Number 2, we're looking for 210 degrees. So now we're dealing with angles that exceed 180 degrees. So we're leaving a little bit of geometry behind. And so we know it's 180 degrees to go from here to here, all the way from the beginning, if it will let me do that here. And then, so I know that's 180, but I need to go 30 more. So that's going to get me here, and then that's going to be my terminal side. Okay, and so then this is demonstrating to me that from here all the way to here is going to be 210 degrees, and we are going to be in quadrant 3. So that's going to be my terminal ray. Next, we have a negative. If we have negative, notice we're going to go the other way. So we're going to go clockwise. So this is at 0 degrees. So this would be negative 90. And then negative 180. And then we're going to have negative 270. And then negative 330 is going to get me to about there. And then that's where my ray is going to be. So it's going to go from here all the way to there. That tells me where my terminal side ends, and we are back in quadrant 1. Next, when we're turning negative 115, again, this is going to give me here. I'm going to, again, negative 90, a little bit more than that. And again, draw in my ray. So I'm going from here to here. And then that's going to be my negative 115 angle. And again, I land in quadrant 3. Next, we're not going to talk about definitely what, like, we'll get more into the definition of more with radians and how do you change them. But what we're going to do is use our unit circle for today. So for 5 pi over 3, we're going to go back to our chart. And then we're going to find that. We're going to figure out how far did we turn. And so if you remember kind of how we talked about how like a full revolution is 2 pi. Half a revolution is a pi. If we just do a quarter of it, then that's dealing with, you know, cutting these things into, you know, quarters and so forth. So we'll break these things down into even more. And so what the one we're trying to find here is we are trying to find 5 pi over 3. And that is actually going to be right here, 300 degrees. So that's its other name. And again, it's a positive angle. So we're going to be turning. We're going to end up in the 4th quadrant. If we do 4 pi over 7, we can definitely check our chart. So 4 pi over 7, that one is going to be not necessarily on our chart. But if you think about that, it's going to be a little bit, if you look at what we have on the chart here, this is going to be pi, and if this is cut in such a way that this is going to be a certain value. So what we have going on here is that, notice how things are cut into 6. So really pi is 6 pi over 6. So if we have 4 pi over 7, that is going to be a smaller area here. So that's going to be somewhere in the 2nd quad. And we can talk more about that later on. So if I cut things like right now, pi here at 180 degrees, that would be 7 pi over 7. So I know that half of that would have been 3 1/2. 4 is a little more. So that's how I definitely know I'm in the 2nd quad. And then lastly, we're going radians and we're going negative. So therefore, again, if we're going to have that work out to be negative 12 pi over 5, and again, we can look at our chart with that if you wanted. We don't have anything really close to that necessarily, but what I like to do is think about, well, how close is that to 2 pi? Well, it's actually, if you think about it, it's a little bit over 2 pi because it goes in there. So when I go back to this is really negative 2 and 2/5 pi. Well, I'm going negative, so therefore this is going to be 2 pi. 2/5 pi is not going to be too much more. I'm going to end up in here. And so that's going to get me to in here, which will give me to the fourth quadrant. So really work on your spinning and try to make sure that you're spinning in a certain direction. And then we're going to focus on the next, talking about changing angles into radians and radians into angle degrees. And then we'll talk about coterminal angles as well. Okay, and as always, have a great day.